Hello everyone and welcome to Matchbook Flashback. I'm your host Alec Ogg, and I've got this big collection of old matchbooks I bought at an estate sale. They're here in this big glass jar, and the matchbooks are all different colors and designs from all different times and places. But the thing is, when I strike each match, the flame begins to swirl hypnotically, and if you look into the flame, you can see a story unfolding in there, trapped like a memory in the matchbook. Let me show you what I mean. I'll grab a matchbook for today. Okay. This one will do. This one's like a reddish... This matchbook is like a reddish tan color, and in a black font it says Yamhill, Oregon. The inside of the paper is more olive-toned and says it was printed in 1982. Let's see, Yamhill, Oregon. That's a small town in the Pacific Northwest. It's about 100 miles southwest of Mount Saint Helens, the volcano that erupted in 1980. But let's go ahead and light one of these matches from this Yamhill, Oregon matchbook and see if there's a story inside. Now, when I strike this match, I need you to look deeply into the flame. That's where the story will be. Look deeply into the flame.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
I was 12 when it happened. Okay. My parents were divorced, and we went out to the summer to Yamhill, Oregon. My dad, he lived northwest of there, up in the hills, in the forest. Nobody knew he was coming except him and our stepmom. And I would have been about 12, my sister would have been about 8. If you look on a map, Yamhill's about an hour east of the coast, up in the lower Cascade Mountains, I guess. And as a particular note, their land backs up to some BLM land. They're about an hour southwest of Portland, Oregon.
What is BLM?
Bureau of Land Management.
Oh, okay.
You're talking pine, fir, trees. In the clearings, you'd have smaller ones with branches lower to the ground. As far as wildlife, you didn't see or hear much. You get out in the woods like that and you don't hear birds chirping like, you would think of a forest back here in Nebraska or even where you live. It gets deathly quiet. So one of our chores was to feed the cows. We'd walk up the hill about a quarter mile to the barn and throw hay bales down and some grain and come back. Well, about the third day we were there, we walked up the trail to do this, and my dad had like 6 or 7 dogs. And I don't know if you've ever been to Oregon, sometimes the trees in clearings will have branches way low to the ground. So we're walking through this small clearing. I remember hearing something, but I don't know what, and I looked that direction and, turned to face it because I heard something. And all of a sudden, this rock comes out at us, maybe softball size, and it came out at us like an underhand throw. I don't know if like a slow pitch softball.
Yeah.
You ever seen? Kind of just a loping throw, not like somebody was trying to peg me with it, or fast pitch baseball throw. More like, hey, I'm trying to get your attention. or see what you are. Me and my sister. We're like, what the hell? So the dogs come shooting out from that direction in the branches and start circling us like they're trying to herd us down the hill. Now we're out away from a lot of people. The nearest neighbor's a mile and a half away. Nobody knew we were coming. Dad was at work, and we heard the door slam, so we knew his stepmom was down at the house and just come out to hang up laundry. So that was the first little incident that kind of happened that was strange. I had never heard of Bigfoot before, ever. And quite honestly, until a couple weeks later, Dad had watched In Search Of, and back then, early 80s, late 70s, Bigfoot stuff didn't have a lot of information. So I don't know if you ever heard of the show In Search Of.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man. Indians call him Sasquatch. They believe he is as gentle as he is powerful and mysterious. He's been seen many times in the rugged mountains and deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. The encounters have not always been peaceful. In 1924, a small group of men were working a mine in a canyon near Mount Saint Helens in Washington. One night, the miners took their weapons inside and bolted the door. They thought they were secure for the evening. Outside, something strange was happening. The cabin was under attack. Boulders rained on the roof, and someone, or something, was trying to break in.
Show In Search Of, that kind of did something like that. But, at that point, I, had no idea what it was. So sometimes ignorance is, you don't get scared if you don't know that you're supposed to be scared. We would hear tree knocks. Sounded like a baseball bat hitting a tree or a baseball. It was sharp, like the crack of a bat, and screams. Sound like somebody was killing somebody. Because the first time I heard it, I said, ran up to my dad, I said, didn't you hear that? It sounded like some woman screaming her head off.
So it sounded like a woman?
Uh-huh. A higher pitched voice, but a scream. And they just blow it, and the adults would blow it off. And the horse would act weird, or the dogs would act weird. Walking through the forest, sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but the experience you're being watched. And every hair on your body stands on end, it seems like, you get goosebumps, and also if it be 80 degrees and you're walking through, all of a sudden you get that shake, like you feel like you're being watched. After I decided to stay for a year to live with my dad, we had, Oregon has springs all over, and they dry up in the summer. We found a footprint over by the barn, and I swear to God, I seen dermal ridges in that footprint. My dad said it was a horse track, but no, you could see toes, and you could see the ridges and the mud.
Can you describe what a dermal ridge is?
It's your fingerprint. Everything is different up the ridges, the valleys, in your fingerprint.
And the thought process being that when those footprints have those dermal ridges, it would be something that's hard to kind of fake.
Right. I mean, Hillbilly Jim and his buddies aren't drinking Busch Light in the garage thinking, hey, let's make a fake footprint and put dermal ridges on them. You know? So nothing much else happened all the way up until January. It was after Christmas, because I thought to myself, school just started. It's back then, we didn't get off days like kids do now, or so from Christmas to Easter was a pretty long stretch. And I'm laying in bed, and I started hearing the coyotes howling. Well, the dogs ran off up to answer in the backyard their howls. Well, all of a sudden, they come plowing back down to the house. And whenever they would get scared, or my dad would come out and look mad, because my dad was a real mean guy, they'd crawl under part of the house, under the porch, by my window. So I slept in the basement. My window where I slept was only about 3 inches taller than the ground outside. We lived kind of on a side hill. So when they would do that, I would bang on the concrete block with my shoe, and they would quiet down. Well, I rolled over to bed, grabbed a shoe, and turned to bang on the wall, and crouching, looking in the window is Bigfoot. Sasquatch. I couldn't tell you how tall he was. I couldn't tell if he was male or female. I could tell you the face looked close to human, but not quite. Had darker reddish hair. Some of the stories I hear is they have long, matted, stringy hair. This, from what I see, this didn't have really long hair. It didn't have short hair, but it had longer hair. It had a pointed head. And it just sat there and looked at me. Must have been for like 10 seconds, and I was so scared I tried to scream. I couldn't. I turned over and bent through the blankets over for, I thought maybe 10 minutes, but it's probably only like a minute. I turned back over, and it was gone. So being a silly kid, I ran outside because I could get out through the basement without being seen. And by my window, there was footprints. And I thought, oh, Dad's got to believe me. There's the footprints. Well, like Oregon does in the winter, it rained and washed them away. Now the color, I could see it really good because we had a porch light and we had a yard light. And so I got a really good view of it. The bare skin on its face wasn't black, but it wasn't white either. It was like a kind of a reddish, brownish type. You know, I don't remember a smell or anything when I went back out. And after it left, the dogs come back out from under the porch like somebody had given an all clear sign.
Can you describe the layout of that basement and where your bed was and where the window was again?
So it was probably 25 by 40 feet long. There was no walls. There was 2 windows, and I slept by one of the windows. That was my little corner.
So when your head is on the pillow, is the window to your left, to your front, or to your right?
To my left.
And so you're looking up and out at it?
Yep. I would have been looking to my left and towards the direction of my feet.
And you said there were some lights outside in your yard that illuminated
it?
The
yard light. Yep. So I couldn't tell the eyes. The eyes looked human. I'll tell you that. They were brown, but they were different.
Did they have whites to the eyes?
Yes.
And you said it had a pointed head. Was there hair on top of the point?
Yes.
And did it have hair all over its face?
No, part of its face, kind of like around the mouth and the nose and the upper lip and the eyes didn't have hair. And its skin was kind of wasn't white, it wasn't dark, almost a reddish tan to it, maybe.
Have you ever seen any illustrations or examples in real life that have resonated as, oh, that's what I saw?
Well, something really close, not 100%. but I have seen a picture, and it's a common picture, I guess is what they tell me. Let's see here. I'll try to send you a picture if I can find it real quick.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you find it, I'd love to see it.
Here's the picture.
Oh, okay. And for the listener, I have that reference image linked in the show notes, and I also used the description he gives to further Photoshop that reference image like a police sketch of what he saw. And I sent this Photoshopped version to Rich afterwards, and he said, "That's really close. Wow, gave me shivers." So that's also in the show notes if you want to see both of those images side by side. Now back to Rich.
But the difference was the hair was longer. Not real long, but I'd say hand length. Where this picture shows it about short, I guess we would say. Now that I'm looking at this picture, I don't remember seeing its ears either. So,
And that was about as pointed as the head was?
maybe a little pointier, but definitely. And where the exposed skin is on this picture, it's where it was kind of reddish, I guess. It wasn't black, but maybe a darker skin tone, maybe more olive. And the hair, like I said, was blackish red. You could tell it was reddish in the light, but it was dark.
Did it have an expression on its face?
Almost blank. Curious, maybe?
Was it in a position where you just saw basically its head filling the window? You couldn't see any of its body posture?
So imagine there's a basement window, probably about 3x2 or 3x3, and you kneel down, well, not kneel on the ground, but kind of squat down to look in it, because it's at ground level. So you're trying to look into a basement window, and you squat down to look into it. Not bend over, but squat down on your haunches.
And so the window was 3 feet by 2 feet ish?
Yeah, best I can recall. I could have bear crawled through the window. It was that big. But looking in the window, I was scared, but I guess I didn't feel threatened. It wasn't acting menacingly. It looked like, curiosity. Blank, kind of like, what am I looking at here? I guess, like I said, I felt like I was being watched, but I never felt threatened out in the woods. So, had that incident, nothing for a couple months. When my dad would get upset, he'd go walk in the woods, said he was going to check the fence, and be gone a couple hours as he went and contemplated life or whatever he was thinking about. And he's usually gone 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours. Well, he'd gone out one Saturday, and then half an hour later he'd come back, and he told my stepmom that I wasn't allowed back outside, and he grabbed a .30-30 rifle and a pistol and headed back out in the woods, and he was gone all day. So he come back and told my stepmom I wasn't allowed to go up to the barn anymore to feed the cows without an adult. Now, my stepmom don't remember that conversation, but you're talking, this was back in 82 and 83. So it's been quite a while. With that effect, she said she's never seen anything like that, or footprints, or heard anything. But yet her husband now has had an experience when he was a kid. So I think it just depends on the person. So anyway, years go by, I lose touch out there. And my dad moved back to where he was born in Indiana. And my sister was with him. And she kind of asked him if he ever seen anything. Well, he referenced that story when I was out there, that he goes, I'm not saying it was a Bigfoot, but it was no bear, and it was about 7.5 feet tall. And he'd followed it for a couple hours. And then it started to get dark out, and he decided he better get home before he got caught out in the woods in the dark. So he's seen it, and that's why he wouldn't let me go back up to the barn to feed the cows. So fast forward back to about 4 or 5 years ago, I reconnect with my stepmom out in Oregon. Me and my wife go visit there by Yamhill. Her brother runs logging company, or his own little side gig, I should say, I guess more than. Anyway, about a mile from where I had my sighting, we're sitting there talking, and all of a sudden there's a great big knock. And it wasn't, he goes, well, I think that's the wind. Well, then it happened again 30 seconds later, and this wasn't like there was no wind that day. You could look at the top of the trees, nothing was moving. And it came down down in a real dark ravine. And he got a real confused look on his face when we walked out towards the edge of the ravine, and we can hear something crashing down through the woods. Well, my wife told my stepmom's husband. She goes, well, I bet you that's Bigfoot. And he goes, yeah, I believe it. He goes, I seen him when I was a kid, or seen footprints in Washington when I was a kid. So that's kind of my story for that particular area. So
your stepmom's husband, he just said he saw footprints?
Yeah, when he was a kid, at 15 years old, I think he said Lake Moses, Washington, but don't quote me on that name.
Okay.
So he had a separate experience, not in that area. But
did he tell you about the separate experience?
It was at a summer camp when he seen him as a kid. So
do you remember the story at all?
No, not really. He didn't get into big detail. He just said that one night they'd heard something, and they went out in the morning and there were footprints all over around the camp. So, I've had another experience, two experiences. My son has seen something here in Nebraska. I don't know what I saw, but I'm pretty sure it was a Bigfoot, but I can't 100% see because I just seen the silhouette. And then I had a experience out hunting in Colorado. We were elk hunting, and so we were camping one night up in the White River National Forest. We were in a big canvas tent. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard whoop, and it was walking the ridge line. And it's hunting season, and a lot of things in the forest, make noise that sound like a whoop. So anyway, the next morning, there's a camp, an outfitter's camp, about a quarter mile down the road from us. And they stopped by and said, hey, were you guys screwing with us? No, why? Well, somebody kept hitting our tent with small rocks and pine cones through the night and was freaking our horses out. So then I thought, I bet it was a Bigfoot. So, and then my son's story is we have a creek that runs, we live in a small town of about 350. We have a creek that runs around on the edge of town, and his buddy lives not too far from it. And they were in about 6th or 7th grade, and they called the house one day because Cody's parents were gone and Jake was over there. And I said, somebody's outside the house. We could almost see them through the upstairs window. I was like, they got to be pretty damn tall. So I go over there, and we had some break-ins at that time, so I thought it was a burglar. I get over there, get out and walk around the house, and there's a flood control dike. All right. Right behind the house. And as I go over there, I see something, and I don't have a flashlight, going over the edge of the dike. Then that goes down back into the wooded area and kind of a swampy area. And the boys come out pale as a sheet. They were scared. They had seen something. And so the next morning I'm out there with Al, Cody's dad, and I had Alan go over the dike to the exact where I was standing and where I'd seen the silhouette. And this silhouette would have been about twice the size of Al. And Al's a big guy like me, 6'2", about 280. So, and I was like, wow. So then I really started getting into, listening to Bigfoot stuff and research and stuff. And in Nebraska here, we have somebody called the Bigfoot lady, Harriet. She has a museum in Hastings, Nebraska. And I started talking to her, telling her about this stuff. And she's like, oh, yeah, you definitely must have had some experiences. So then I started looking into it. And this is real funny because my cousin used to give me a bad time. We were hunting for buddies. Well, in one particular year, I didn't get down to hunt with him in southeast Nebraska. And the following year, I said, so did you see anything weird? And he goes, well, I'm not going to make fun of you about seeing Bigfoot anymore. And he wouldn't elaborate what happened. But from now, he's a believer now. So he's seen something. But he won't tell me what. I think he's too embarrassed to tell me what he's seen.
Oh, I wish he would tell you.
Yeah. So that led in, we went to breakfast that morning, and we're sitting in a little cafe in Nebraska City, Nebraska. And I'm telling about all this stuff I've learned and, my stuff as a kid. So he excuses himself to go to the bathroom. There's an old couple small town cafe right close. And my cousin leaves and he goes, excuse me. And this guy's wife is like, oh God, Frank, don't tell him. He'll think you're crazy. He proceeds to tell me that 2 years prior, he was cutting hay down by the Missouri River. And I don't know if you know anything about when you do a field, you go around it a couple of times to create a headlands to turning around. And this was first cutting hay. And it was kind of early in the year. So he makes one pass and he comes back and hits a fawn. It happens quite a bit on late carry fawns. If does didn't get bred until December. They don't show up until June. And once in a while they get ran through a hay machine. Kind of mangles them up and kills them, So he goes to the end of the field and comes back. Well, as he comes back, he sees something. He says, now I'm an old mechanic. So this was a self-propelled windrower. I'm 6'2". I'd look on the ground with the guy sitting in the machine. I would look him in the knees. So he said this thing, he could look right out the window and it was looking eye to eye with him. It bent down, kind of scrunched down on its side and grabbed the fawn, turned around and went about 50 feet and probably 3 or 4 steps, stepped over a standard 3 barbed wire fence and disappeared into the undergrowth next to the river. So that was his story. So I passed that on to Harriet and she put it down as a sighting. So
did he describe what his looked like?
He said it looked like a big damn gorilla. Long hair. He said its face was almost human. He goes, like, if I had a gun, I couldn't have shot it because I'd have thought it was a person. But he said it walked weird. He said it didn't have a gait like we had. It almost walked like it was almost walking heel to toe almost. So how tall do you think it was based on that eye to eye in the window? So my guess would be about 8'4". And here in Nebraska, I don't think we have a resident population. I think they migrate up the Missouri River from Kansas and Oklahoma area in the spring and summers. We just don't have enough cover for them to hide effectively in the winter. So,
going back to your son's story, did he ever describe to you what he saw visually?
He pointed at TV one day. He said, "That's what I saw." He said, "It was a picture of Bigfoot." He goes, "That's what we seen out the window."
How old was he at the time he saw it?
About a 6th or 7th grader.
And the thing he pointed at on the TV, was it just kind of your typical brown one?
Yeah, a longer hair, pointy head. He said above its eyes it looked like it had a ridge, so I'm assuming he meant a brow ridge.
And where in Nebraska was this?
So we live in a little town called Platte Center, Nebraska. We're about 105 miles west of the Missouri River, but we have a major river running across us, the Platte River, which is about 20 miles away, and we got some feeder creeks and stuff.
What would you tell to someone who hasn't seen one, who is skeptical, and you were trying to convince them?
Here's my thinking. You're not going to prove it until you have a body, but I don't want someone to go out and intentionally kill one just to prove it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Why do you think they're not acknowledged by government organizations?
I have a theory on that too. That's another story. So I don't know how old you are.
I'm 33.
Back in the early 80s, there in the Pacific Northwest, there was something called the spotted owl. That almost brought the timber industry in the Pacific Northwest to its knees because they were protecting all this land. So when I was a younger man out visiting my dad when he still lived in Oregon, he had a neighbor who was a forestry guy, and he said, oh yeah, they exist, but the government won't acknowledge it because it will destroy the timber industry in the western United States and Canada. And why is that? Well, they give like 10 miles to this spotted owl for habitat protection. Now imagine a 600-pound, 8-foot-tall animal would probably get about 200 square miles per animal of protected land. Well, that would take, and say population of 800 animals in the Pacific Northwest, how many square miles that would take off the harvesting list. So I think it has a lot to do with economics is why they won't. And then, go ahead.
Oh, I've heard theories too that perhaps the government set up national forests and national parks in order to have designated spaces for these things, and it was kind of just set up under the guise of it being recreational areas set aside for humans, but in reality it has another purpose. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Maybe. So this old guy that told us this, when Mount Saint Helens erupted, he was one of the first forestry geological teams to go into the area. And they found bodies, he said. He goes, that's all I want to tell you is we found bodies. And then basically men in black come and took them bodies away and told us we didn't see a thing. So.
How did you know this man?
He was my dad's neighbor. He's retired. So.
And he was a trustworthy person to you?
Seemed to be. He had became a Methodist minister. Or some type of minister. Christian minister, I guess.
Wow, I wish is he still around?
No. Geez, he'd have been in his 70s in the mid 1980s, so I'm sure he's gone now. I mean, you're talking about a guy that so the lady gave him back 72 cents more change than he needed, so he drove 25 miles back to town to give him back their change. So, because he felt bad for having it. So, to me, I mean, somebody like that, you wouldn't think. I mean, you never can tell, right? But someone who's that, honest to do something like that. I mean, honestly, would you drive 20 miles to give 72 cents back to somebody?
No.
They give you the wrong change. I mean, to me, that speaks of a deep, personal, honest person. So.
Yeah. Do you remember how it came up that he was mentioning that to you?
So yeah, we were talking about the eruption, and he had given me a bag of ash. And it wasn't that big a deal because people were getting them out of their rain gutters, because when it rained down, it washed down in the gutters.
Yeah.
And then my dad making a joke, and he said, well, you got any souvenirs of Bigfoot? And that's kind of how that came about. So.
And tell me again, he was part of what team that saw the bodies?
So when Mount Saint Helens erupted, they sent in Forestry Service members who had geological backgrounds experience, and he must have had some type of geological experience, seismic experience with the eruption and such.
And so he was just in the area and witnessed this?
Well, they sent teams in to conduct surveys, I guess, if the story I remember is correct. The land was wiped out. If I don't know, you remember, you weren't even born when Mount St. Helens happened.
I know all about it, though. I'm fascinated by it.
It wiped everything out there, and so they sent teams in to look at damage and this and that, and I'm assuming he must have been on Mount St. Helens or at the bottom of it and found all this stuff. So that's my guess.
And he mentioned the words Men in Black?
Yep. That's what he said. He said that they showed up in an unmarked car. 4 of them got out of the car. Someone flashed, like a badge or something to his team leader, and they gathered him around and said, "You didn't see." All 6 of them said, "You didn't see a thing. This never happened. We didn't have this conversation." So.
Did he say he found bodies just on the ground?
He said he found them where the forest was, so he didn't elaborate too much or describe them too much. So, so many people will go by, what the government tells them, all they'd have to do is say, "Oh no, these guys didn't see anything. They had, delusions from being out there." So it's not easy to try to disprove it and convince other people that it didn't happen.
What do you think that they are?
At 53 years old, knowing what I know now, I think they're a real creature, highly intelligent. Like I tell my one daughter all the time, who is a skeptic, I said, "I know what I've seen. I've seen bears. I've seen cougars. I've seen this, out in the woods. I know what I've seen. And to the day I die, I'll swear to God I've seen Bigfoot face to face."
Well, as you can see, the match has gone out. And as the smoke clears, I can still smell those Douglas fir trees up in Oregon. I hope you enjoyed hearing Rich's encounter as much as I did. I'll definitely be closing my curtains extra tight this evening. I don't want to see anything looking back at me from outside the window tonight. And remember, if you want to see that artist's rendering of the Sasquatch from Rich's encounter, the link to that image is in the show notes. We'll also include a picture of the area 1 mile from his encounter where his wife heard something later in life. That'll also be in the show notes. And hey, while you're clicking around on your phone, go ahead and give Matchbook Flashback a 5-star rating. It just takes 1 click, and it really helps this little show grow. Another easy way to support Matchbook Flashback is to text a link of this episode to someone who you think might enjoy it too. This podcast is spread by word of mouth, so every share helps. Last but not least, if you or someone you know has experienced something unusual, shoot me an email. My email is alec@parasar.co. It's spelled out in the show notes. But that's it for me. I'm gonna go put this matchbook collection back on the shelf, but I hope you come back next week because I have another match to light.